The wind howled through the valley like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first bitter promise of winter. Gray clouds hung low over the Wyoming territory, heavy with snow that fell in sparse, lazy flakes across the vast expanse of grassland. It was late autumn of 1889, and the land seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the harsh months ahead. Luke Barrett stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the horizon blur into nothing. At 28, he had the weathered hands of a man twice his age and eyes that had seen too many solitary sunrises. The Barrett Ranch sat deep in a valley 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by rolling hills that turned golden in summer and bone-white in winter. It was a lonely place, but Luke had made peace with loneliness long ago. "Storm's coming," old Samuel called from the barn, his voice barely carrying over the wind. The hired hand had worked the ranch for 15 years, arriving when Luke was just a boy learning to rope cattle alongside his late father. Now, Samuel's back was bent with age, his movements slow but steady as he secured the barn doors. Luke nodded, though Samuel couldn't see him. His gaze remained fixed on the narrow trail that wound down from the eastern ridge. Few travelers came this way, especially this late in the season. The main road to Cheyenne lay 20 miles north, and most folks had the sense to use it. The cattle lowed restlessly in the near pasture. Sensing the change in weather, Luke counted them absently. 43 head, down from 60 in the spring. The drought had been hard on the grass, and he'd sold more than he'd wanted to make it through, but the ranch would survive. It always did. He was about to head inside when something caught his eye. A dark shape moving slowly along the trail. Luke squinted, his hand instinctively moving to the Winchester propped against the porch rail. As the shape drew closer, he could make out a wagon, listing badly to one side, pulled by a single exhausted horse. "Samuel," he called, his voice sharp with urgency. "Got company." The old man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the gray light. Together they watched as the wagon lurched to a stop 50 yards from the house. For a long moment, nothing moved except the snow swirling around the broken vehicle. Then a woman climbed down from the driver's seat. She moved like someone who had forgotten what solid ground felt like, stumbling slightly as her feet hit the dirt. Her dress, once blue perhaps, was now the color of dust and hardship. A heavy shawl wrapped around her shoulders did little to hide how thin she'd become. Behind her, 2 small faces peered out from the wagon bed. Children, no more than 6 or 7 years old. Luke stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth. As he drew closer, he saw the woman more clearly. Dark hair escaped from beneath a worn bonnet, framing a face marked by exhaustion and something else, a familiar curve to her jaw, a certain way she held her shoulders even in defeat. His breath caught in his throat. "Luke?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough with cold and disuse. "Luke Barrett?" The sound of his name on her lips sent him back 20 years, to summer days by Miller's Creek, where 2 children caught tadpoles and made promises they were too young to keep. Joanna Miller, the doctor's daughter, who read books under the cottonwood trees and laughed like creek water over stones. Joanna! The name felt strange in his mouth after so long. Good Lord. A thin, mangy dog crawled out from under the wagon, tail between its legs, ribs showing through patchy fur. It whined softly but didn't approach. Joanna swayed on her feet, one hand reaching back to steady herself against the wagon wheel. "My children," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They're cold. We've been traveling. The wheel broke yesterday, but I fixed it best I could. I didn't know where else." She stopped, seeming to realize she was rambling. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come." Luke found himself moving before he'd made any conscious decision. "Samuel, help me with the wagon. We'll put it in the barn." He turned to Joanna, carefully keeping his voice neutral. "You and the children come inside. Get warm." She hesitated, pride warring with necessity on her face. One of the children, a boy, poked his head further out of the wagon. "Mama, I'm cold." That decided it. Joanna nodded once, shortly. "Thank you." Luke helped her get the children down from the wagon. Twins, he realized. A boy and a girl, both with their mother's dark hair and solemn eyes. They clung to Joanna's skirts, staring at him with the wary curiosity of young animals. The dog slunk after them, keeping its distance. The ranch house was simple but solid, built by Luke's father 30 years ago, when the territory was even wilder than it was now. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a large stone fireplace that Samuel had already stoked against the coming cold. 2 bedrooms led off the back, and a ladder climbed to a small loft. "Sit," Luke said, gesturing to the chairs near the fire. "I'll make coffee." Joanna sank into a chair as if her legs had finally given up. The children huddled close to her, the girl sucking her thumb, the boy's eyes darting around the room like he was memorizing escape routes. The dog curled up by the door, watching everything with yellow eyes. Luke busied himself with the coffee pot, grateful for something to do with his hands. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he'd known. The last time he'd seen Joanna Miller, she'd been 16, standing on her father's porch in a yellow dress, waving goodbye as her family's wagon rolled out of town. They were heading east, her father said, to better opportunities in St. Louis. She'd promised to write. She never had. "The coffee will be ready soon," he said without turning around. "Are you hungry? I've got some stew from yesterday." "Please," Joanna said softly. "For the children." Luke ladled stew into bowls, his movements careful and deliberate. He set the bowls on the table, along with spoons and a half loaf of bread. The children looked to their mother for permission before falling on the food with silent intensity. Joanna ate more slowly, but with the same desperate hunger. Samuel came in, stamping snow from his boots. He glanced at the scene, then at Luke, his weathered face carefully blank. "Wagon's in the barn. Horse needs tending. She's about done in. See to her," Luke said. "Give her extra grain." Samuel nodded and left without another word. He'd been around long enough to know when not to ask questions. The silence stretched out, broken only by the scrape of spoons against bowls and the pop of wood in the fireplace. Luke poured coffee, set a cup near Joanna's elbow, then retreated to lean against the wall, his own cup untouched. "What are their names?" he asked finally. "Thomas and Sarah." Joanna replied. She'd removed her bonnet, revealing hair that had once shone like mahogany but was now dull with neglect. "They're 6. 6 years. She'd been gone 12 years and had 6-year-old children. The mathematics of it sat heavy in the room. "Your husband?" Luke kept his voice carefully neutral. Joanna's hand stilled around her coffee cup. "Gone." The word held finality but no grief. Luke waited, but she offered nothing more. The boy, Thomas, finished his stew and looked hopefully at the pot on the stove. Without being asked, Luke refilled both children's bowls. "You can have my bed tonight," he said. "You and the children. I'll take the loft. We don't want to impose—" "It's not imposing." The words came out sharper than he intended. He softened his tone. "The snow's getting worse. You can't go anywhere tonight anyway." As if to emphasize his point, the wind rattled the windows, sending drafts through gaps in the boards. Joanna pulled her shawl tighter. Though the room was warm enough, "Just tonight," she said. Luke nodded, though something in his chest twisted at the words. He'd learned long ago not to examine such feelings too closely. The evening passed in awkward fits and starts. Luke showed them to the bedroom, brought in extra blankets, found an old shirt of his that might serve as a nightgown for the children. Joanna thanked him each time in the same quiet, formal tone, as if they were strangers, which, he supposed, they were now. The children whispered to each other as their mother tucked them into the big bed, their voices too low for Luke to make out words. The dog had crept inside and curled up by the foot of the bed, still watching everything with those unsettling yellow eyes. "His name is Bones." The girl, Sarah, offered suddenly, pointing at the dog. "We found him at the last place." "That's a good name," Luke said. though the creature looked more like it belonged to Death himself than to two small children. Joanna kissed each child's forehead, murmured something that might have been a prayer, then stepped out of the room, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "Thank you," she said again. "I know this is unexpected." "Joanna." He stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. 12 years was a long time. People changed. God knew he had. "How did you know to come here?" "I asked in town. They said the Barrett Ranch was this way. I thought—" She lifted one shoulder in a gesture that might have been a shrug. "I remembered you used to talk about this place, when we were children. Your father's dream of raising cattle in Wyoming territory. He died 8 years ago," Luke said. "The ranch is mine now." "I'm sorry. It was his time." Luke studied her face in the lamplight, searching for the girl he'd known. She was there, somewhere, beneath the exhaustion and the unnamed sorrows. "What happened? Joanna, where's your husband?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't know." The words lay between them like stones. Luke waited, but she offered nothing more. Finally, she turned toward the bedroom. "Good night, Luke." "Good night." He stood in the main room long after she'd closed the door, listening to the wind and the settling of the fire. Samuel had retired to his small room off the kitchen, and the house fell into the deep quiet that Luke had grown accustomed to over the years. Finally, he climbed the ladder to the loft, taking a lantern with him. The space was cramped and cold, used mainly for storage. He made a pallet of old blankets and lay down fully clothed, staring at the rough boards above his head. Joanna Miller. He'd thought of her over the years, of course, wondered where she'd gone, who she'd married, what kind of life she'd made in the East. In his imaginings, she'd been happy, a doctor's wife, perhaps, living in a fine house with running water and gas lights, not this worn ghost of a woman with haunted eyes and children who ate like they'd been hungry for months. Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, patting against the roof like small, cold fingers. Luke closed his eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. When it finally took him, he dreamed of summer creeks and promises unkept, of a girl in a yellow dress waving goodbye, and of all the words he'd never found the courage to say. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Joanna rose with the sun, moving about the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone used to making do with little. She cleaned what didn't need cleaning, mended what wasn't quite torn, and cooked meals from the simple stores Luke kept. The children, still wary as half-wild cats, began to explore the boundaries of their new sanctuary, though they never strayed far from their mother's sight. Luke maintained his distance, leaving before dawn to tend the cattle and returning after dark. He spoke only when necessary, answering Joanna's careful attempts at conversation with grunts or single words. The ranch work didn't require such long hours in late autumn, but the barn and the cold seemed preferable to the awkwardness that filled his house like smoke. On the 4th morning, Joanna cornered him as he headed for the door. "You're avoiding me," she said, her chin lifted in a gesture he remembered from childhood. Joanna Miller preparing for a fight. "Got work to do." He reached for his coat. "Luke." She stepped between him and the door, forcing him to look at her. "We were friends once. Can't we at least talk?" "About what?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "About how you left without a word? About how you show up 12 years later with children and stories that don't make sense?" Color rose in her cheeks. "I was 16. My father made the decision to leave, not me. You could have written." "I did write." Her voice broke slightly. 3 letters. You never answered." Luke stared at her, something cold settling in his stomach. "I never got any letters." They stood there, the weight of lost years pressing down on them both. Finally, Joanna stepped aside. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here." "That's not—" Luke stopped, frustrated. He'd never been good with words, and 12 years of mostly talking to cattle hadn't improved matters. "You can stay as long as you need." He left before she could respond, but her expression followed him out into the gray morning. Hurt and hope, warring in eyes that had once sparkled with laughter. That evening, he returned to find her in the barn, trying to mend the broken wagon wheel. Thomas and Sarah sat on overturned buckets, watching their mother work. The dog, Bones, had filled out slightly on scraps and looked less like death warmed over. "Let me," Luke said, taking the hammer from her hands. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Joanna jerked back as if burned. Luke knelt by the wheel, examining the damage. The repair she'd attempted on the trail was admirable but temporary. The kind of fix someone made when stopping meant freezing to death. "Where were you headed?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the work. "West. Maybe California, somewhere warm." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I suppose that sounds foolish. In November? Yes. We left in September, from Nebraska." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "We had a homestead there. 160 acres under the Homestead Act." Luke knew about the Homestead Act, free land for those willing to work it for 5 years. It had drawn thousands west, chasing dreams of prosperity. For every family that succeeded, 10 more were broken by drought, locusts, or simple brutal loneliness. "What happened?" Joanna was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Charles, my husband, he wasn't a farmer. He was a clerk in St. Louis when we met. But he had ideas about land, about building something grand out west." He could talk about it for hours, paint pictures with words until you could see it too. Wheat fields golden in the sun, a white house with green shutters, prosperity and purpose. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the barn was relatively warm. The reality was different. The land was hard, full of rocks. The first crop failed, then the second. Charles grew, frustrated. He'd leave for days, sometimes weeks, saying he was looking for work in town, but he'd come back smelling of whiskey and other women's perfume. Luke's hand stilled on the wheel. Thomas and Sarah had gone very quiet. That particular stillness children learned when adults discussed things they weren't supposed to hear. The last time he left was in July. Joanna continued. "He said he'd found work at a mining camp, promised to send money. We waited. The creditors came in August. I sold everything we had left, packed what would fit in the wagon, and started west. I don't know what I thought, that we'd find him, maybe, or find something better. Instead, I found Winter. He abandoned you." It wasn't a question. Joanna's laugh was bitter as alkali water. "The neighbors said he was seen heading south with a dance hall girl from Omaha, but perhaps they were mistaken. Perhaps he's in a mining camp right now, trying to earn enough to send for us." The lie hung in the air between them, fragile as spun glass. Luke finished with the wheel and stood, wiping his hands on his pants. "This'll hold for now, but you'll need a proper wheelwright to fix it permanent." "Thank you." She gathered the children, shooing them toward the house for supper. At the barn door, she paused. "I did right. Luke, whatever happened to those letters, I need you to know that you were the best friend I had. I wouldn't have left without saying goodbye if I'd had a choice." Luke watched her walk back to the house, the children flanking her like small guards. The dog trotted after them, tail still low but no longer quite between its legs. He stood in the barn until full dark, remembering a 16-year-old boy who'd haunted the post office for months, hoping for word that never came. That night, Luke was awakened by sounds from below, the creak of floorboards, the soft murmur of voices. He climbed down from the loft to find Joanna sitting by the dying fire with Sarah in her lap. The child was crying quietly, her small body shaking with suppressed sobs. "Bad dream," Joanna explained, rocking her daughter gently. "She gets them sometimes." Luke added wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life. Orange light danced across their faces, making shadows that shifted and swayed. Sarah's sobs gradually quieted to hiccups. "Papa's not coming back, is he?" the girl asked suddenly. Joanna's arms tightened around her. "We have to take care of ourselves now, but that's all right. We're strong, aren't we?" Sarah nodded against her mother's chest, but fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Luke found himself moving closer, sitting on the floor near Joanna's chair. After a moment's hesitation, he began to speak. "When I was about your age," he said to Sarah, "my mama died. Fever took her in the spring. I used to have bad dreams too. Dreams where I'd wake up and think I could hear her in the kitchen, making breakfast. But when I'd run out, the kitchen would be empty, cold, just my PA sitting at the table, staring at nothing." Sarah peered at him with wet eyes. "Did they stop, the dreams?" "Eventually. And you know what helped? My PA told me that the people who love us, they leave pieces of themselves behind, not ghosts or anything spooky, but little things. The way we make coffee like they did, or the songs we remember them singing, they're not really gone as long as we remember." It was more words than he'd strung together in months. Joanna looked at him over Sarah's head, something soft in her expression that made his chest tight. "Will you remember us?" Sarah asked. "When we leave?" The question hit like a physical blow. Luke met Joanna's eyes. "Who says you're leaving?" "Mama says we can't stay forever. We have to find our own place." "Well," Luke said carefully, "winter's no time for traveling. You'll stay until spring. At least, the ranch is big enough." Joanna opened her mouth, probably to protest, but Luke stood before she could speak. "It's settled. Now, let's get this little one back to bed." He helped them up, his hand briefly supporting Joanna's elbow. She felt fragile under his touch, bird bones and determination. Sarah had wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, face buried in Joanna's shoulder. "Thank you," Joanna whispered as they passed. Luke nodded, not trusting his voice. He stayed by the fire until he heard the bedroom door close, then climbed back to his cold loft. But sleep didn't return. Instead, he lay awake thinking about letters never received, dreams that woke children in the night, and the way Joanna had looked at him, like he was something more than the taciturn rancher he'd become. The next day brought a change. Luke returned for the midday meal instead of staying out with the cattle. He found Joanna teaching the children their letters at the kitchen table, using a charred stick to write on flat pieces of wood. "Don't mean to interrupt," he said from the doorway. Thomas looked up eagerly. "Mr. Luke, Mama's teaching us to write our names. Look!" He held up his board, showing wobbly but recognizable letters. "That's fine work," Luke said, surprising himself by meaning it. "Your mama was always the smartest one in school." "She says you were smart too," Sarah piped up. "Just quiet smart, not show-off smart." Joanna's cheeks pinked. "Sarah, it's true, though," Luke said, pulling out a chair. "Your mama used to help me with my arithmetic. Never could get the hang of long division without her." The children peppered him with questions about their mother as a girl, and Luke found himself telling stories he hadn't thought of in years. About the time Joanna had climbed the highest branch of the cottonwood to rescue a stranded cat. About the spelling bee where she'd beaten students 3 years older. About the summer they'd tried to build a raft and ended up soaked and laughing in Miller's Creek. Joanna listened with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, occasionally correcting his memory or adding details. For the first time since she'd arrived, her smile reached her eyes. The blizzard struck 3 days later with the fury of a wounded beast. Luke had seen the signs, the way the cattle huddled together, the strange yellow tinge to the clouds, the unnatural stillness that preceded nature's violence. He and Samuel had worked frantically to secure everything they could, driving the cattle into the near pasture where the land dipped and provided some shelter. By nightfall, the wind screamed like a living thing, driving snow horizontal across the valley. The temperature plummeted until even the walls of the sturdy ranch house couldn't keep out the cold entirely. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and drafts found every tiny gap in the boards. Luke came in from his final check on the animals, snowblind and frozen to the bone. Joanna met him at the door with hot coffee and a towel, her face tight with worry. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough." He accepted the coffee gratefully, his hands so numb he could barely grip the cup. "We'll be snowed in for days, maybe a week." Her eyes went to the pantry's shelves, mentally calculating their supplies. Luke saw the worry deepen. "We have enough." he said. I laid in stores for winter. Just need to be careful with the firewood. That night, they all slept in the main room. Luke had dragged mattresses from the bedrooms, arranging them near the fireplace. It was the only way to stay warm as the temperature continued to drop. Samuel occupied a chair by the fire, dozing fitfully, his arthritis acting up in the cold. The children curled between Luke and Joanna like puppies, with bones pressed against their feet. In the darkness, Luke could hear Joanna's breathing, too quick and shallow for sleep. Can't sleep, he asked quietly. I keep thinking about Nebraska, she whispered back. The first winter there, we nearly froze. Charles had built the soddy wrong. The roof leaked, and snow came through. I held the babies against me all night, terrified they'd stop breathing from the cold. You survived. Barely. Her voice was bitter. The neighbors found us the next morning. The Hoffmans, German family from the next claim over. They took us in, taught us how to survive. Without them, she trailed off. Luke turned his head to look at her profile in the firelight. What happened to them? Grasshoppers came the summer before last. Ate everything down to the ground. They gave up, went back east, begged us to come too, but Charles wouldn't hear of it. Said we'd stick it out, that the next year would be better. She laughed softly. No humor in it. He left 2 weeks later. The wind chose that moment to rattle the house so violently that everyone stirred. Thomas whimpered in his sleep, and Joanna immediately curved her body around him, murmuring comfort. Luke watched her. This fierce, fragile woman who'd endured more than anyone should have to. The second day of the storm, they woke to find the woodpile dangerously low. The main supply was in the shed, 20 feet from the house. Might as well have been 20 miles in the whiteout conditions outside. I'll go, Luke said, already reaching for his coat. You can't see 2 feet in that. Samuel protested. You'll get turned around, freeze to death. No choice. Fire goes out. We all freeze. Joanna stood abruptly. Then we go together, tie a rope between us. Absolutely not. Luke Barrett. You stop being noble and start being practical. Her eyes flashed with the old fire he remembered. 2 people have a better chance than 1. The children need us both to come back. He wanted to argue, but she was already wrapping herself in every piece of warm clothing she could find. In the end, they tied themselves together with 20 feet of rope. Luke in front, Joanna behind. Samuel stood ready at the door to pull them back if needed. The moment they stepped outside, the wind tried to tear them apart. Snow filled Luke's nose and mouth, ice crystals sharp as ground glass. He couldn't see the shed, couldn't see anything but white. He moved by memory and instinct. One hand on the rope, the other stretched out feeling for obstacles. Joanna's weight on the other end of the rope was the only thing that felt real. Once, he stumbled and fell to his knees. She was there immediately, helping him up, her strength surprising for someone so small. They found the shed by running directly into it. Luke fumbled with the latch, his fingers too numb to work properly. Joanna pushed his hands aside and managed it, both of them tumbling inside out of the wind. For a moment, they just breathed, pressed close in the darkness of the shed. Luke could feel Joanna shaking, from cold or fear or both. We need to load fast, he said against her ear. Can't stay here long. They filled their arms with split wood, as much as they could carry. The journey back was worse, the wind at their backs now, pushing them off course. Luke kept one hand on the rope that led back to Samuel, praying his old friend had the strength to anchor them. Then Joanna fell. Luke felt the jerk on their connecting rope and turned back, finding her by touch more than sight. She'd gone down hard. Wood scattered around her. When he pulled her up, she cried out, "My ankle!" Without thinking, Luke dropped his own load and swept her up in his arms, wood and all. She was lighter than she should have been, months of hardship having whittled her down to bones and will. He followed the rope back step by agonizing step. Joanna's face pressed against his neck, her arms tight around him. Samuel hauled them in like fish on a line. They collapsed just inside the door, gasping and covered in snow. The children were crying. Thomas and Sarah both, frightened by the violence of the storm and their mother's absence. "Mama!" They rushed to her, and she gathered them close despite her obvious pain. Luke and Samuel examined her ankle. Twisted, not broken, though it swelled rapidly. Luke found himself kneeling before her, carefully removing her boot, his hands gentle as he'd learned to be with injured animals. "Thank you," Joanna said softly, her hand briefly touching his snow-wet hair. That night, with Joanna unable to walk, Luke took over the cooking. He made a simple stew, the kind he'd been eating for years, but Joanna praised it as if it were a feast. The enforced closeness of the storm had broken down walls between them. They talked more freely now, sharing memories and filling in the gaps of 12 years. "Why didn't you ever marry?" Joanna asked as they sat by the fire after the children had fallen asleep. Her injured ankle was propped on a stool, wrapped in cloth. Luke stared into the flames. "Never found anyone who—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not easy to live with, set in my ways. Most women want more than a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Some women want safety," Joanna said quietly. "Peace, a place where they can raise their children without fear." Their eyes met across the fire-lit space. Luke felt something shift in his chest, like ice beginning to crack on a frozen river. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "I used to think I wanted adventure, excitement, a husband who'd show me the world. Instead, I got—" She gestured vaguely at herself, encompassing all the disappointments and betrayals. "You survived," Luke said. "That's more than most can say. Survival isn't living." She shifted, wincing as the movement jarred her ankle. "Sometimes I feel like I died back in Nebraska, like I'm just a ghost dragging my children toward some imaginary better place that doesn't exist." Luke moved before he could think better of it, kneeling beside her chair. "You're not a ghost. You're the strongest person I know. Always have been." Joanna's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not strong. I'm scared all the time. Scared I'll fail them. Scared we'll starve or freeze. Scared that I'm just like Charles, chasing impossible dreams while my children suffer for it." "You're nothing like him." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "He ran. You stayed. You're here, fighting for them every day. That's not weakness. Joanna, that's courage." She looked at him for a long moment, tears tracking down her cheeks. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers cold against his skin. "What did I do to deserve a friend like you?" Friend. The word lodged in his throat like a stone. But he caught her hand, held it gently. "Rest now. Storm can't last forever." On the third night, the wind finally began to die. The snow still fell, but the vicious howling that had shaken the house ceased. Everyone's spirits lifted, even as their supplies dwindled. Luke rationed the firewood carefully, keeping the fire just high enough to prevent freezing. It was then, in that quiet hour between night and dawn, that Joanna began to tell the whole truth about her marriage. Luke had taken a turn sitting up, keeping the fire fed, when she appeared from the bedroom, limping on her injured ankle. "Couldn't sleep," she explained, sinking into the other chair. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the flames. Then, without preamble, Joanna began to speak. "Charles hit me the first time 6 months after we were married. I'd burned the bread. Such a small thing." Her voice was steady, matter of fact, which somehow made it worse. "He apologized after, cried, said it would never happen again." Luke's hands clenched on his knees, but he didn't interrupt. "It happened again, of course, and again, always followed by tears and promises. When I got pregnant with the twins, it stopped for a while. I thought maybe—" She shrugged. "But after they were born, it got worse. He was careful, never where it would show. Never in front of the children. Joanna, the homestead was my escape," she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "He couldn't hit me if he was gone for weeks at a time. And when he was there, the work exhausted him too much for violence. I thought we could make it work. I was a fool. You did what you had to do to protect your children." She looked at him then, her face illuminated by firelight. The night he left for the last time, he'd been drinking, said horrible things, said the children would be better off without a worthless mother, said he'd take them, sell them maybe. There were people who'd pay for pretty children. That's when I knew. If he came back, I'd kill him. I'd take the kitchen knife and wait for him to sleep, and I'd kill him for threatening my babies. The confession hung between them, stark and terrible. "But he didn't come back," Luke said quietly. "No, he chose a dance hall girl instead. And I ran west with everything I could carry, telling myself I was looking for him, but knowing, hoping I'd never find him." She laughed, brittle as winter branches. "What kind of mother does that make me? Dragging my children into the wilderness, running from a man who's probably drinking himself to death in some Omaha saloon?" Luke moved then, crossing to her chair and kneeling before it as was becoming his habit. He took her hands in his, feeling the calluses and scars of hard living. "It makes you a mother who'd do anything to keep her children safe. It makes you brave and fierce and—" He stopped, words failing him as they always did at crucial moments. But Joanna understood. She always had. She leaned forward, her forehead touching his. They stayed that way, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, while the dying fire cast their shadows long and dark against the walls. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a world transformed. Snow lay 4 feet deep across the valley, sculpted into fantastic drifts by the wind. The sun emerged weak and pale, offering light but no warmth to the frozen landscape. Luke spent the first clear day digging paths to the barn, the well, the wood shed. Samuel, his joints stiff from the cold, helped as he could. The cattle had survived huddled together in the sheltered pasture, though they'd need extra feed to make it through winter now. It was Thomas who suggested building snow forts, his young face bright with the resilience of childhood. Soon, both children were outside, their laughter ringing across the white expanse. Joanna watched from the window, her ankles still too tender for walking on uneven ground. "They bounce back quick," Luke observed, joining her at the window. "Children do. It's adults who carry the weight." She turned from the window, studying his face. "Luke, we need to talk about what happens next. Spring will come, and stay." The word hung between them, simple and impossible. "Luke, I mean it. This ranch is too big for one man. I could use the help." He gestured vaguely at the white world outside. "The children could go to school in town come spring. It's only a day's ride. People would talk. Let them." Joanna shook her head, but her eyes held a longing that made his chest tight. "You don't understand what you're offering. A woman with children. A woman who might still be married, for all we know." "I understand plenty." Luke's voice was rough. "I understand you need a home, and I have one. Everything else is just details." That afternoon, he began work on converting the storage room into proper quarters for the children. The space was small, but could be made comfortable with effort. Thomas followed him like a shadow, holding boards and handing him nails with solemn concentration. "Mr. Luke," the boy said after a while, "are you sweet on my mama?" Luke nearly hammered his thumb. "What makes you ask that? You look at her the way Papa used to look at the saloon ladies, only nicer. Out of the mouths of babes." Luke set down his hammer, choosing his words carefully. "Your mama is my friend. I want to help her." Thomas considered this. "Papa said he wanted to help us too." Then he left. The simple statement held a world of hurt. Luke turned to face the boy fully. "I'm not your papa, but I promise you this. If you stay here, I won't leave. This ranch is my home. I don't run from my home." The boy nodded slowly, then went back to sorting nails as if they discussed nothing more important than the weather. That evening, Luke returned from the barn to find Joanna had managed supper despite her injured ankle. The kitchen smelled of biscuits and stew, homey in a way it hadn't since his mother died. She'd set the table with his mother's good plates, usually kept in the cupboard. "What's the occasion?" he asked. It's Sunday. Sarah informed him. Mama says Sunday dinner should be special, even if it's just stew. They ate like a family, the children chattering about their snow fort, Samuel telling stories of winters past. Luke found himself watching Joanna across the table, the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, the grace in her movements despite her injury. When she caught him looking, color rose in her cheeks. After dinner, Joanna pulled out a worn Bible. Would you mind? We always did readings on Sunday evenings. Luke nodded, though religion had been scarce in his life since his mother's passing. Joanna read about Ruth gleaning in the fields, her voice soft and steady. The children leaned against her, one on each side, their eyes growing heavy. When she finished, Luke surprised himself by speaking. My mother used to read that story, said it was about finding home where you least expected it. Joanna's eyes met his over the children's heads. Your mother was a wise woman. That night, after everyone had retired, Luke found himself unable to sleep. He descended from the loft to check the fire and discovered Joanna sitting in the near darkness, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Can't sleep either, he asked. She shook her head. Too much thinking. He rebuilt the fire and sat across from her. They'd done this so many times now, these middle-of-the-night conversations, that it felt natural as breathing. I've been remembering things, Joanna said, about us, when we were young. Do you remember the day you taught me to ride? You fell off Buttercup 3 times, determined as anything to get back on. You held the bridle the whole 4th time, walking beside me so I wouldn't be scared. She smiled at the memory. I think that's when I first... She stopped, the words catching. First what? Nothing. Old memories playing tricks. But Luke knew. He'd felt it too, that day by the creek when she'd looked at him with shining eyes and said he was the best teacher in the world. They'd been too young then, and by the time they were old enough, she was gone. Joanna. He leaned forward. What I said earlier about staying, I know what you're offering. She interrupted. A business arrangement. Room and board in exchange for keeping house. It's generous. That's not what I'm offering. The words fell into silence. Joanna's hands stilled in her lap. Then what? Luke stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, moonlight turned the snow blue-white, ethereal as a dream. I'm no good at this, never learned how to court proper, but He turned back to her. I built this place thinking someday I'd have a family to fill it. Then years passed and I figured I'd missed my chance. Got used to being alone. Luke, let me finish. He came back, sat on the floor by her chair, their positions from the night of the storm. When you showed up, it was like spring after a long winter, like remembering what it felt like to want things again. Joanna's breath hitched. I'm not free to want things. I have children to think of, a husband who might still... To hell with him. The vehemence surprised them both. He gave up any claim when he abandoned you. You don't owe him anything. The law might disagree. Then we make our own law. Luke took her hands, rough skin against rough skin, working hands that knew hardship. Stay, Joanna. Not as my housekeeper or hired help. Stay as whatever you're willing to be. Let me take care of you and the children. Let me try to make you happy. Tears tracked down her cheeks. You don't know what you're asking. I'm not the girl you remember. I'm worn out, used up. I have nightmares. I flinch when anyone moves too fast. I don't care. His grip on her hands tightened. You think I'm the boy you knew? That boy had dreams, ambitions. This man just wants to wake up knowing you're safe under his roof. That's all I need. Joanna slipped from the chair to kneel with him on the floor. Her hands came up to frame his face, thumbs tracing the weathered lines the years had carved there. I don't know how to be what you deserve, she whispered. Be yourself. That's all I've ever wanted. The kiss, when it came, was tentative as frost forming. Her lips were chapped from the cold, trembling against his. Luke held himself still, afraid to spook her, letting her set the pace. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Somehow that admission broke the last wall. She kissed him again, deeper this time, 12 years of longing poured into the connection. When they finally parted, her hands were twisted in his shirt and his were tangled in her hair. "Stay," he said again. A plea and a promise. This time, she nodded. The next morning brought awkwardness. They moved around each other carefully, hyper-aware of every accidental touch. The children, with the uncanny perception of the young, sensed the change immediately. "Are you and Mama courting now?" Sarah asked Luke directly over breakfast. Luke choked on his coffee. Joanna turned red as the sun rose. "Sarah," Thomas hissed. "You're not supposed to ask. But I want to know." Samuel cackled from his corner. "Out of the mouths of babes, eh?" Luke set down his cup carefully. "Your mama and I are figuring things out. Does that mean we can stay?" Thomas asked, a hope naked in his voice. "Yes," Joanna answered before Luke could. "We're staying." The children erupted in cheers, even dignified Thomas bouncing in his seat. Bones barked, caught up in the excitement, in the chaos. Luke caught Joanna's eye. She smiled, shy but real, and his heart turned over in his chest. That afternoon, while the children napped, Luke found Joanna mending clothes by the window. Her ankle was better, though she still favored it slightly. He sat beside her, picking up one of his shirts that needed buttons. "I should teach you to do this properly," she said, watching his clumsy attempts. "I've been sewing my own buttons for 8 years. It shows." But her criticism was gentle, teasing. She took the shirt from him, demonstrating the proper technique. "See? Like this." Their hands touched over the fabric. This time, neither pulled away. "Joanna," Luke said, "about last night. Do you regret it?" "No, never. I want to do right by you, court you proper, even if it's backwards." She set down the sewing. "Luke, we're not children anymore. We know how hard life can be. I don't need flowers and poetry. I need—" She paused, searching for words. "I need to know you won't change, that you won't become someone else when the newness wears off. I've been the same man for 28 years, too set in my ways to change now. Promise me." Her voice was fierce. "Promise you'll never raise a hand to me or the children. Never." "I promise." He caught her chin gently, making her meet his eyes. "I'd cut off my own hand first. You have my word." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you." That evening, as had become their custom, they all gathered in the main room. But now Luke sat on the floor by Joanna's chair, Thomas leaning against his side as he whittled a toy horse. Sarah was in her mother's lap, practicing her letters on a slate. Samuel dozed by the fire, and Bones gnawed a bone in the corner. "This is nice," Sarah said suddenly, "like a real family." Joanna's hand found Luke's shoulder, rested there lightly. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, the Barrett ranch house was warm and full of something that might have been the beginning of happiness. Luke covered Joanna's hand with his own, marveling at how right it felt. He'd waited 12 years for her to come back. He could wait however long it took for her to truly feel safe, to truly believe in the home they were building together. For now, this was enough. The fire crackling, the children content, and Joanna's hand warm on his shoulder, anchoring him to a future he'd never dared imagine. The stranger appeared on a Tuesday morning, riding a bay mare with a limp. Luke spotted him from the barn, a dark figure against the snow-bright landscape. Something in the man's posture, arrogant, even from a distance, made Luke's shoulders tense. "Samuel," he called quietly. "We got company." The old man peered out, then spat tobacco juice into the snow. "Don't like the look of him." Neither did Luke, but hospitality demanded he walk out to meet the rider. The man was thin, with the pallor of someone who spent more time in saloons than sunlight. His clothes were town clothes, unsuited for the weather, and his boots had never seen honest work. "Morning," Luke said, stopping a careful distance away. "Help you with something?" "Looking for someone." The man's eyes swept the ranch buildings. Woman traveling with 2 children. Heard she might have come this way. Luke's expression didn't change, but inside, everything went cold. Lots of folks travel through. What's your business with her? Family matter. The stranger smiled, showing too many teeth. Name's Frank Harrington. The woman's husband asked me to find her. Bring her home. Worried sick. He is. That's so. Charles Morrison's a friend of mine. Says his wife took off with his children. No word of explanation. Man's got rights. You know. Luke heard the door open behind him. Without turning, he knew Joanna stood there, probably having recognized the voice. He shifted slightly, putting himself more fully between the house and the stranger. Haven't seen anyone like that, Luke said evenly. Storm would have killed anyone traveling with children. Harrington's eyes narrowed. Funny thing, fellow in town said he sold supplies to a woman with twins couple weeks back. Said she asked directions to the Barrett Ranch. Townfolk talk doesn't make it true. Maybe I'll just have a look around. Make sure. No. Luke's hand moved to his hip, where his colt rested. You'll turn that horse around and ride on. This is private property. Harrington's false smile faded. Now, friend, no need for unpleasantness. I'm just trying to reunite a family. Surely you understand a man's concern for his wife and children. I understand plenty. Luke's voice dropped low. Dangerous. I understand a man who cares about his family doesn't send others to fetch them like stray cattle. Now get off my land. For a moment, they stared at each other, tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Then Harrington touched his hat mockingly. I'll be in town a few days. If you happen to remember seeing anyone, the Imperial Hotel's where I'm staying. His eyes flicked past Luke to the house. Charles is offering a reward. $50. That's good money for information. He turned his horse and rode away. But Luke remained standing in the cold until the figure disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he return to the house, where Joanna waited white-faced by the window. He's gone, Luke said. Joanna sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Frank Harrington, he runs card games in Omaha. Charles owed him money. Her laugh was bitter. I suppose my husband found a way to pay his debts after all, sell information about his runaway wife. He won't get you. Luke knelt beside her chair. I promise. You can't promise that. If Charles is alive, if he sent men after us, the law is on his side. A wife belongs to her husband. The children, too. To hell with the law. Luke, no. He caught her hands, stilled their trembling. You're not going back. Neither are the children. I don't care what the law says. Thomas and Sarah had crept out from the bedroom, drawn by the raised voices. They stood uncertainly in the doorway, and Luke saw the fear in their eyes, the kind of fear children shouldn't know. Come here, Joanna said softly, and they ran to her, burying their faces in her skirts. It's all right. Everything's all right. But it wasn't, and they all knew it. That night, Luke sat cleaning his rifle while Joanna put the children to bed. Samuel worked on the other guns, checking loads, ensuring mechanisms worked smooth. They didn't speak, but understanding passed between them. The ranch was preparing for siege. When Joanna emerged, she paused, seeing the weapons. It won't come to that. Maybe not. Luke didn't look up from his work, but I'll be ready if it does. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. I won't have bloodshed because of me. If he comes back, if he insists, you're not going. The words came out harsher than intended. Luke set down the rifle, forced himself to speak more gently. Joanna, what kind of man would I be if I let you go back to that? A law-abiding one. Laws are made by men who never had to watch a woman flinch every time someone moves too quick, never saw children go still and quiet when they hear a certain tone of voice. He leaned forward. Some things matter more than law. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I've brought trouble to your door. You were at peace before I came. I was dead before you came. The admission surprised them both. Luke ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his inability to find the right words. Just alone and going through motions. You brought me back to life. You think I'll give that up because some snake oil salesman comes making threats? Joanna rose and came to him, cupping his face in her hands. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You survived," he said simply. "You got yourself and those children through hell and found your way here. That's enough." She kissed him then, soft and desperate. When they parted, she whispered, "I love you. I should have said it years ago, but I'm saying it now. I love you." Luke Barrett. His arms came around her, holding her tight. "I love you too. Always have." They might have stayed like that forever, but Samuel cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt, but we should set watches tonight, just to be careful." Luke nodded. "I'll take first watch." That began 3 days of tension. Luke barely left the house, keeping watch while pretending to work. The children felt it, Sarah barely spoke, and Thomas jumped at every sound. Joanna tried to maintain normalcy, but her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. On the third night, Harrington returned. This time, he wasn't alone. Luke woke to bones growling low in his throat. He slipped from the loft, rifle in hand, and peered out the window. 3 riders approached through the moonlight, Harrington and 2 others, rough-looking men who moved like they knew violence intimately. "Samuel," Luke hissed. "Company." The old man was already awake, reaching for his shotgun. Joanna appeared from the bedroom, face pale but determined. "Take the children to the root cellar," Luke told her. "Bar the door from inside." "Luke, go! Now!" She gathered the confused, sleepy children and disappeared through the cellar door. Luke heard the heavy bar fall into place and breathed a little easier. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. "Barrett," Harrington called. "Let's discuss this like civilized men." "Nothing to discuss." Luke shouted back, "I told you to stay off my land. Now that's unfriendly. We've come all this way in the cold." Harrington's voice carried false joviality. "Just want to talk to Mrs. Morrison. Let her know her husband's willing to forgive and forget. She's not here. Come now, we know better." "Her boy was seen in town yesterday with your hired man, buying peppermint sticks. I heard—" Luke cursed internally. He'd sent Samuel and Thomas to town for supplies, thinking it safe. Someone had recognized the boy. "The woman's made her choice," Luke called. "Leave her be. Can't do that. Man's got rights to his property." "She's not property." The words came out as a growl. "Law says different." Harrington shifted in his saddle. "Look, Barrett, no one wants trouble, but Charles Morrison's paying good money for his family's return. Now, you can make this easy, or—" Luke's rifle shot cut him off, the bullet kicking up snow inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly unseating Harrington. "That's your warning," Luke said. "Next one won't miss." The 3 men conferred briefly. Then one of the rougher-looking ones called out, $50 ain't worth dying for, mister. But there's ways to make a man reconsider his stubbornness. Be a shame if something happened to this nice ranch. Fire spreads quick in winter when the waters froze. You threatening me? Just observing." The man grinned, teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "We'll be around." They rode off, but the threat lingered like smoke. Luke remained at the window until dawn, watching, waiting. Only when the sun was fully up did he let Joanna and the children out of the cellar. "They'll be back," Samuel said unnecessarily. "I know." Luke looked at Joanna, saw the determination mixing with fear in her eyes. "We need help." It went against every instinct he had. Luke Barrett had always handled his own problems, but this wasn't just about him anymore. He had a family to protect. "I'll ride to town," he decided. "Talk to Sheriff Watson. He's a fair man." "The law—" Joanna began. "Maybe, but Watson knows me, knows I don't make trouble without cause." Luke caught her shoulders. "Pack what matters. If this goes bad, Samuel will get you and the children to the Hendersons' ranch. They'll help you get farther west. I won't run again. You will if it keeps the children safe." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but finally, she nodded. Luke reached town by mid-morning. His horse lathered despite the cold. He found Sheriff Watson at his desk, coffee cup in hand. "Luke." The sheriff's weathered face showed surprise. Don't see you in town much. Got trouble, Tom. Luke laid out the situation, keeping his voice steady despite the urgency pressing at him. Man's trying to force a woman back to a husband who beat her, threatened to burn my ranch if I don't hand her over. Watson listened, his expression growing darker. This woman, she's the one been staying with you, the widow. She's not a widow. Her husband abandoned her, but he's alive, apparently selling information about her whereabouts to pay gambling debts. Complicated situation. Watson rubbed his jaw. Legally speaking, I know what the law says. I'm asking what's right. The two men stared at each other. Finally, Watson sighed. Harrington and his boys have been making themselves unwelcome at the Imperial. Started 2 fights, accused of cheating at cards. I was looking for a reason to run them out of town anyway. Relief flooded through Luke. So, you'll help? I'll have a word with them. Suggest they move on before they wear out their welcome complete. Watson stood, reaching for his gun belt. Can't do more than that. Luke, but sometimes a strong suggestion from the law is enough. It wasn't much, but it was something. Luke gripped the sheriff's hand. Thanks, Tom. Don't thank me yet. Men like that don't always listen to suggestions. Watson's eyes were serious. You prepared for that? I am. Then God help you. And Luke, that woman and her children, they're lucky to have you. Luke rode back faster than was safe, fear eating at him the whole way. But he found the ranch peaceful, Joanna hanging laundry like it was any other day. When she saw him, she dropped the wet shirt and ran to meet him. Sheriff's handling it, he said, dismounting. Maybe it'll be enough. And if it's not, Luke pulled her close, breathed in the scent of her hair, soap and sunshine despite the winter cold. Then we handle it our way. The days that followed Sheriff Watson's intervention passed in uneasy quiet. No sign of Harrington or his men, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He kept the rifle close, slept light, started at every unfamiliar sound. The strain showed on all of them. Even the children had stopped playing. Sensing the adults' tension, it was Joanna who finally broke the spell. We can't live like this, she said one evening, setting down her mending with unusual force. Jumping at shadows, waiting for something that might never come. It's no life for the children. Luke looked up from cleaning his gun, the 3rd time that day. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop hiding and start living. She stood, hands on hips, the fighter in her showing through. If they come, but I won't waste what time we have being afraid. Something in her fierce determination eased the knot in Luke's chest. He set aside the gun and went to her, pulling her into his arms. You're right, he murmured against her hair. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for trying to protect us. Just let us live too. From that moment, things shifted. They returned to their routines, Luke working the ranch, Joanna tending house, the children doing lessons and chores. But underneath the normalcy ran a new current, an awareness of time's preciousness that made every ordinary moment shimmer with meaning. It was during this fragile peace that Luke made his decision. He found Joanna alone in the kitchen one afternoon, kneading bread dough with practiced motions. Flour dusted her cheeks, and she hummed softly, a hymn he remembered from childhood. Joanna. She looked up, smiling. You're back early. Need to ask you something. He took a breath, suddenly feeling like that tongue-tied boy by the creek again. I know things are complicated, but I think we should. Luke Barrett, are you trying to propose? Heat climbed his neck. Not trying. Doing badly, apparently. She left the dough, came to him with floury hands, leaving white handprints on his shirt as she gripped his arms. Ask me properly, then. He dropped to one knee right there on the kitchen floor. Joanna Morrison, no, Joanna Miller, the girl I've loved since I was too young to know what love meant. Will you marry me? Not legal, maybe, not in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of God and this community. Will you be my wife? Tears tracked through the flour on her cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood and kissed her, tasting flour and salt tears and the sweetness of a future finally claimed. "We'll have to be careful," she said when they parted. "If Charles is truly alive, we'll handle it, together." He brushed flour from her cheek. "I want to do this right. Speak to Reverend Mills. Have a proper ceremony. Luke," her voice was gentle but firm, "we can't. You know we can't. Not publicly." The reality of it hit him like cold water. She was right. A public ceremony would be announcing to the world that she was committing bigamy, that the children were being raised in sin. The scandal would destroy any chance of a normal life. "Then we do it our way," he said finally. "Private. Just us, the children, Samuel. God doesn't need a church to hear vows." That evening, he told Samuel his intentions. The old man's face split in a rare grin. "About time, boy. Was wondering when you'd work up the nerve. Will you stand witness? Be honored to—" They held the ceremony 3 nights later. In the main room of the ranch house, Joanna wore her best dress, still worn but carefully mended. Luke had trimmed his beard and put on his father's suit, smelling of cedar from the trunk where it had been stored. The children served as attendants, Sarah carrying wildflowers preserved from autumn, Thomas holding the Bible. Samuel stood as witness, and even Bones seemed to understand the solemnity. Sitting quietly by the fire, Luke had written his vows on the back of a feed store receipt. But when the moment came, he forgot the paper and spoke from his heart. "Joanna, you were my first friend, my first love, my first loss when you left. These 12 years, I built this place thinking someday I'd have someone to share it with, never admitting I was building it for you. You've brought light back into these rooms, laughter back into these walls. I promised to protect you and the children with my life, to provide for you with my labor, to love you with whatever heart I have left. It's battered some, but it's yours. Always has been." Joanna's vows came through tears. "Luke, you gave us shelter when we had none, safety when we were hunted, love when we'd forgotten what it felt like. You've shown my children what a real father looks like, steady and kind and present. I can't promise an easy life. I come with burdens, with fears, with a past that might catch up to us. But I promise to face whatever comes standing beside you, to make this house a home, to love you with every broken piece of me until they're not broken anymore." Samuel read from Ecclesiastes about 2 being better than 1, his gravelly voice giving the ancient words new weight. Then Luke took the simple gold band he'd bought in town, told the jeweler it was for his cousin, and slipped it onto Joanna's finger. "With this ring," he said, the traditional words feeling both right and dangerous, "I thee wed." She had no ring for him, but she lifted his hand and kissed his palm, curling his fingers to hold the kiss. "With this heart, I thee wed." They kissed as the children cheered, and Samuel wiped his eyes, muttering about smoke from the fire. It wasn't legal, might never be legal, but in that moment, in that room, before God and the people who mattered most, Luke and Joanna became husband and wife. The wedding night was gentle, tentative. The children slept in their new room, Samuel in his quarters. For the first time, Luke didn't climb to the loft. Instead, he joined Joanna in what was now their bedroom. She sat on the bed's edge, brushing her hair with long strokes. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "Isn't that foolish? A woman with 2 children, nervous as a bride." Luke sat beside her, took the brush from her hands. Nothing foolish about it. He began brushing her hair himself, marveling at its softness. "We can wait. There's no rush." She turned to him. "I don't want to wait. I've waited 12 years to be where I belong." Their coming together was slow, careful. Luke's hands trembled as he helped her with buttons, and she laughed softly at their shared awkwardness. But when skin met skin, when whispered endearments filled the darkness, all nervousness fled. They moved together like they'd been made for this moment, every touch a promise, every sigh a prayer. Afterward, they lay entwined, Joanna's head on Luke's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, my wife." The word sent a thrill through him. "My wife." She lifted up to look at him. "No regrets? About the unconventional nature of it all?" "Only regret is it took so long." He traced her face in the darkness. "You're worth any scandal, any trouble. You and the children both." The next days passed in a blur of quiet happiness. They were careful in public, Joanna still introduced as his housekeeper in town, the children as her late husband's. But at home, they were truly married. The small gestures of affection natural as breathing. It was Thomas who first called him Papa. They were mending fence, the boy helping with the earnest concentration he brought to every task. When Luke showed him how to twist the wire tight, Thomas said, "Thanks, Papa," then froze, eyes wide with fear at his slip. Luke's throat closed. He set down his tools, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can call me that if you want. I'd be honored." "Really? Really?" Thomas threw his arms around Luke's waist, hugging fierce and quick before pulling back, embarrassed by the display. But his smile could have lit the whole valley. That night at dinner, Sarah looked between her brother and Luke. "If Thomas calls you Papa, can I too? I'd like that very much." She beamed. "Papa Luke, it sounds nice." Joanna's eyes met his across the table, full of love and gratitude and something that looked like peace. This was what he'd built the ranch for. Luke realized. Not the land or the cattle, but this. Family gathered around a table, children's laughter filling the rooms, a woman's loving touch making house into home. But even in happiness, shadows lingered. 2 weeks after their private wedding, Luke went to town for supplies and heard troubling news. Harrington had been seen in Cheyenne, asking questions about property law and women's rights in the territory. "He's not giving up," Watson told Luke quietly. "Man like that smells money somewhere in this situation. Be careful." Luke returned home with a heavy heart, but said nothing to Joanna. Let her have what peace she could. Time enough for worry if trouble actually came calling. That night, as they prepared for bed, Joanna touched the slight swell of her belly with wonder. "Luke, I'm fairly certain." He stared at her, understanding dawning. "A baby?" She nodded, tears starting. "Are you happy?" "I know it complicates." He cut her off with a kiss, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "Happy? Joanna, I don't have words. A baby." She laughed against his neck. "Our baby." They held each other in the lamplight, the future spreading before them uncertain but no longer fearful. Whatever came, they'd face it together, as a family, as husband and wife in all the ways that truly mattered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside the Barrett Ranch house, all was warmth and light and the quiet joy of dreams finally taking root in Wyoming soil. The news came on a gray March morning, delivered by a group of miners passing through from the Montana gold fields. They stopped to water their horses, and Luke offered them coffee and breakfast, as was the custom. It was over the meal that one of them, a grizzled man named Patterson, mentioned the tragedy. "Terrible thing up at the Sweetwater diggings," he said, sopping biscuit in gravy. "Whole section of the mine collapsed. Dozen men trapped. They got most out, but 3 or 4 still buried when we left." "When was this?" Luke asked, more from politeness than real interest. 2 weeks back, maybe 3. They were still digging when we passed through." Patterson shook his head. "One fellow they pulled out was in bad shape. Charlie something. Morrison, I think. Kept calling for his wife and young'uns before he passed." The coffee cup slipped from Joanna's hands, shattering on the floor. Luke was beside her instantly, but she waved him off, kneeling to collect the pieces with shaking hands. "You're certain of the name?" Luke asked, keeping his voice level. "Pretty certain. Morrison, yeah. Gambling man, from what I heard. Owed money all over camp." Patterson noticed Joanna's distress. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to upset you with such talk." It's all right." Joanna's voice was barely a whisper. Did he say anything else before he died?" Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the fellow who was with him said he seemed sorry for something. Kept saying he'd done wrong by his family. Wanted them to know he'd been trying to get enough money to go back for them. But you know how it is when a man's dying. They say all sorts of things." Joanna stood abruptly and walked out of the room. Luke heard the bedroom door close softly. He turned back to the miners, who were looking uncomfortable. "Thank you for the news," Luke said. "My wife, she knew the family. It's hit her hard." After the miners left, Luke found Joanna sitting on the bed, holding the photograph they'd found in her wagon, the only image of Charles Morrison she'd kept. It showed a handsome man with weak eyes and a charming smile. "He's really dead," she said, not looking up. "I should feel something, relief, sadness, but I just feel empty." Luke sat beside her, not touching, letting her have her space. "You don't owe him any particular feeling. He was what he was. The children will need to know. They have a right to know their father is dead." She finally looked at him, eyes dry but haunted. "What do I tell them? That he died trying to get money to come back for us? Let them think he cared? Tell them the truth, that he's gone and can't hurt them anymore. That's not the truth, though." She laughed bitterly. "The truth is, he abandoned us to chase another dream, and it killed him. The truth is, he was coming back only because Frank Harrington probably promised him money for information. The truth is—" Her voice broke. Luke pulled her against him then, and she came willingly, burying her face in his shirt. "The truth is, he's gone," Luke said firmly. "And you're here. The children are here. We're a family now. That's all the truth that matters." She cried then, great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Luke held her through it, understanding these weren't tears of grief for Charles Morrison, but for the girl who'd married him believing in love, for the years of fear and disappointment, for the final closing of a chapter written in pain. When the tears finally stopped, Joanna pulled back, wiping her face. "I need to go to town, file the proper papers, make it official. I'm a widow now, legally free to—" She touched her belly where their child grew. "Free to be your wife-in-law as well as heart. We'll go tomorrow, together." That evening, they told the children. Luke had expected tears, confusion, maybe anger. Instead, Thomas and Sarah exchanged a long look. Then Thomas asked, "Does this mean Papa Luke is our real papa now?" Joanna's breath caught. "Would you like that?" Sarah climbed into Luke's lap, small arms going around his neck. "He's already our real papa. He's the one who's here." From the mouths of babes, Luke thought, holding the little girl close. Thomas came to lean against his other side, and Luke freed an arm to pull him in too. "If you'll have me," Luke said carefully, "I'd like to adopt you both proper. Make it legal that you're my children." "Our name would be Barrett?" Thomas asked. "If you want." The boy nodded firmly. "Thomas Barrett, I like it." That night, after the children were asleep, Luke and Joanna lay together in the darkness, hands linked over her belly. "I feel guilty," she admitted, "being happy that he's dead. You're not happy he's dead. You're happy you're free. There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him. "Luke, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you ever think about finding him, making him disappear?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "The night Harrington came, after you told me everything. I lay up in that loft thinking about riding out, tracking Morrison down, making sure he never came near you again. But then I realized something." "What?" "That would have made me like him. Using violence to solve problems, thinking I knew best regardless of what you wanted, so I stayed. And now—" He pulled her closer. "Now God or fate or the mountain took care of it. Your conscience is clear. Our baby will be legitimate," she whispered. "Born in wedlock, legal and proper. Our baby would be perfect either way. But yes, I'm glad we can give them that." The trip to town the next day was surreal. Word had already spread. News traveled fast in the territory, and people who'd looked askance at Joanna for months now offered condolences. She accepted them with grace, playing the grieving widow just enough to satisfy propriety. At the courthouse, the clerk was sympathetic and efficient. Death certificate filed, widowhood official. Then, with shaking hands, Joanna signed the marriage certificate Luke had been carrying since their private ceremony. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Barrett," the clerk said, stamping the document. "And my condolences on your loss, ma'am, though it seems you've found happiness again." Outside, Joanna stood in the spring sunlight, staring at their marriage certificate. "It's real, legal, binding. Was real before," Luke said. "This is just paper. Important paper. Our children will have a father's name on their birth records. Our baby—" She stopped, hand going to her belly. "What is it?" "Nothing. Just, for the first time. I'm not afraid. Not looking over my shoulder. Not waiting for someone to take it all away." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Is this what safety feels like?" "I hope so." They stopped at Reverend Mill's small church on the way home. The elderly minister received them warmly, listening to their story with compassion. "I married you once in my heart," he said when they finished. "Now I can bless what God has already joined. Would you like me to say a few words? Make it proper in the church's eyes as well?" So they stood before the simple altar, hands joined, while Reverend Mills spoke blessings over their union. No guests, no finery. Just two people who'd found their way to each other across years and pain. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Barrett, again." Luke did, soft and sweet, tasting tears on Joanna's lips. "Happy tears," she assured him. "All happy from now on." As they drove home, the children chattering in the wagon bed about their new name, Luke felt something settle in his chest. The constant vigilance of the past months eased. They were legal now, all proper and recognized. No one could take them away. That evening, a rider appeared. Sheriff Watson, looking pleased with himself. "Heard the news," he said, accepting the offered coffee. "That Harrington fellow lit out of town right quick when word came about Morrison. Guess he figured there was no profit in chasing a legal widow. He won't be back." "Doubt it. Man like that follows money, and there's none here now." Watson raised his cup in a toast. "To the Barrett family, all legal and proper like." After he left, they celebrated quietly. Samuel produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, pouring drinks for the adults and finding peppermint sticks for the children. They toasted their new life, their legal union, their growing family. "To Charles Morrison," Joanna said suddenly, raising her glass. The others looked at her in surprise. "Without him, I'd never have come west. Never have found my way back to Luke. So here's to wrong choices that lead to right ending." It was generous, Luke thought. More than the man deserved. But that was Joanna, finding grace even in the darkest stories. That night, she showed him the papers she'd kept hidden in her trunk. Their original marriage certificate, birth records for the children, all the legal proofs of a life she'd thought she'd have to keep living, one by one. She fed them to the fire, watching Charles Morrison's claim on her turn to ash. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "Really, truly over." Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands spreading over her belly where their child grew. "No, it's just beginning." Spring came early that year, melting snow revealing green grass beneath. The ranch prospered, the cattle healthy, the garden Joanna planted promising good harvest. Thomas and Sarah bloomed too, no longer looking over their shoulders, no longer flinching at unexpected sounds, and in Joanna's belly, the baby grew, conceived in uncertain times, but to be born into certainty, into love, into a family made not just by heart but by law. Sometimes Luke would catch Joanna standing at the window, looking east toward where her old life lay buried. But when she turned back to him, her smile held no shadows. The past was gone, burned away like morning mist. Only the future remained, bright with promise in the Wyoming sun. The news of Charles Morrison's death had set them free in ways deeper than law. It had released Joanna from the last chains of guilt, had given the children permission to love their new father wholly, had allowed Luke to claim his family without reservation. In the end, Morrison had given them one final gift, his absence, permanent and legal. It was more than he'd ever given them in life, and they accepted it with gratitude and moved forward into their new beginning. Spring arrived in full glory, painting the Wyoming Valley with wildflowers and fresh grass. The Barrett Ranch had never looked better, fences mended, barn roof patched, and a new chicken coop built by Luke with enthusiastic help from Thomas and Sarah. Even old Bones had filled out, no longer the skeletal creature that had arrived with them, but a proper ranch dog with a glossy coat and protective instincts. Joanna's small kitchen garden had expanded into neat rows of vegetables and herbs. She worked there most mornings, her growing belly making her movements careful but not slowing her determination. The children helped when not at their lessons. Luke had built a small desk where Joanna could teach them reading and arithmetic. "Mama, when will the baby come?" Sarah asked one afternoon, small hands muddy from planting beans. "Late summer, sweet one, around harvest time." Joanna smiled, hand resting on a rounded stomach. "Perfect timing. The baby can help us celebrate bringing in the crops." Luke watched from the porch, still sometimes unable to believe this was real. His family, his wife, his children, for he'd filed the adoption papers the same day as their marriage certificate, making Thomas and Sarah legally Barrett children. The change in the community had been gradual but definite, where once there had been whispers about the widow at the Barrett Ranch. Now there were wedding gifts left on their porch, a quilt from Mrs. Henderson, preserves from the minister's wife, even a cradle carved by Jonas Muller, the German carpenter in town. People like a happy ending, Samuel observed one evening. Makes them feel the world's not all bad. It was true. Their story, the childhood sweethearts separated by circumstance and reunited by fate, had captured the imagination of the frontier town. The darker parts were glossed over in the telling, transformed into a romantic tale of love conquering all. Luke didn't correct them, let them have their fairy tale. The truth, with all its pain and fear and desperate courage, belonged to him and Joanna alone. One Sunday in May, they attended church as a family for the first time. Joanna wore her good dress, let out to accommodate her pregnancy. The children were scrubbed and pressed, Sarah's hair in neat braids, Thomas's cowlick tamed with water. Luke felt strange in his Sunday clothes, but proud as they walked down the aisle to find seats. The congregation welcomed them warmly. After the service, the women surrounded Joanna, offering advice about pregnancy and childbirth, while the men clapped Luke on the back and made jokes about sleepless nights ahead. "It's good to see you happy, Barrett," said Carl Henderson, whose ranch bordered Luke's to the north. "Man needs a family, makes him work harder, gives him purpose." Luke nodded, watching Joanna laugh at something Mrs. Muller said, her face bright with joy. "Can't argue with that." The children had found friends too. The Hendersons' boys for Thomas, the minister's daughter for Sarah, watching them run and play like normal children, no shadows in their eyes. Luke felt a satisfaction deeper than any successful calving season. That evening, as they drove home in the wagon, Sarah fell asleep against Luke's shoulder while Thomas peppered him with questions about the sermon. Joanna sat close on his other side, humming softly. "Happy?" Luke asked quietly. "Beyond words," she replied. The summer weeks passed in a blur of work and preparation. Luke and Samuel brought in the best hay crop in years, the barn loft full to bursting. Joanna, despite Luke's protests, insisted on keeping up with her usual work until her size made it impossible. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she'd say, then soften it with a kiss. "Though I wouldn't mind if you'd carry the water buckets." They prepared the small room next to theirs for the baby, Luke building a new bed frame while Joanna sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The children contributed too. Thomas carved wooden animals with increasing skill, while Sarah picked flowers to make it pretty for the baby. It was during this peaceful time that unexpected visitors arrived. Luke was in the far pasture when he saw the wagon approaching, well made, pulled by matched horses, clearly belonging to people of means. His hand went automatically to his gun before he recognized the couple on the seat. Dr. and Mrs. Miller, Joanna's parents. He rode back quickly, arriving just as Joanna emerged from the house, flour in her hair from baking. The expression on her face when she saw her parents, joy mixed with old hurt and uncertainty, made Luke's chest tight. "Mama, Papa?" Her voice sounded young, uncertain. "Mrs." Miller, an older version of Joanna with silver threading her dark hair, climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility. "My girl, my dear, dear girl." They embraced, both crying, while Dr. Miller stood awkwardly by the wagon. He was smaller than Luke remembered, age having stooped his shoulders and thinned his hair. His eyes, though, were sharp as ever as they took in the scene. His pregnant daughter, the two children peering shyly from behind her skirts, the tall rancher standing protective guard. "Luke Barrett." "Doctor," Miller said finally. "I suppose I should have expected it would be you." "Sir." Luke nodded, not sure what else to say to the man who'd taken Joanna away all those years ago. "We got your letter, Mrs." Miller said, pulling back to look at her daughter. "About everything. We came as soon as we could arrange matters." "My letter?" Joanna looked confused. I wrote them," Luke admitted, "after we were married proper. Thought they should know that you were safe and happy." Joanna's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Oh, Luke." The reunion was awkward at first. 12 years was a long time, and there was much pain to bridge. But Sarah, with a child's directness, broke the ice by marching up to Mrs. Miller and announcing, "I'm Sarah Barrett, and I'm 6 years old." "Are you really Mama's mama?" "I am indeed." Mrs. Miller knelt carefully, her traveling dress pooling around her. "That makes me your grandmother, if you'll have me." Sarah considered this. "Can you make cookies? The best in Missouri?" "Then yes." Even Dr. Miller smiled at that. They stayed a week, the small house somehow expanding to accommodate them. Old wounds were addressed, if not fully healed. Dr. Miller admitted he'd been wrong to forbid correspondence, had been trying to protect Joanna from what he saw as a limiting future. "I wanted more for you than a ranch wife's life," he said one evening, he and Joanna sitting on the porch while Luke tended the horses. "You were so bright, so capable. I thought the city would offer you opportunities." "It offered me Charles Morrison," Joanna said quietly. "While this ranch offered me Luke, which do you think was the better bargain?" Her father had no answer to that. Mrs. Miller, for her part, threw herself into grandmothering with enthusiasm. She taught Sarah to embroider, helped Thomas with his letters, and shared recipes with Joanna that had been in the family for generations. In the evenings, she'd tell stories of Joanna's childhood that made them all laugh, even Luke. Hearing about the determined little girl who'd tried to bandage every injured animal in the county. "She brought home a snake once," Mrs. Miller confided. "Said it looked sad. Took her father 2 hours to convince her snakes don't have expressions. Still not convinced." Joanna muttered, making everyone laugh. The night before they left, Dr. Miller sought Luke out in the barn. "I misjudged you, son," he said without preamble. "Thought you were just another ranch boy without ambition, but I see now what I missed then. You're steady, solid, the kind of man who builds something and stays to tend it." "Thank you, sir. Take care of them. My daughter, my grandchildren. The new one coming." He cleared his throat. "I was a fool to think education and city living were more important than love and safety. Don't make my mistakes." "I won't," Luke promised. When the Millers left, with promises to return after the baby's birth and invitations for the family to visit Missouri, the ranch felt both emptier and fuller. Emptier for their absence, but fuller for the reconciliation, for the healing of old wounds. "Thank you," Joanna said that night, "for writing them, for giving me my parents back." "Family's important," Luke said simply. "Wanted our children to know all their grandparents." Summer ripened into autumn, and with it came Joanna's time. The baby announced itself just after dawn on a September morning, when the aspen leaves were turning gold. Luke sent Samuel racing for the midwife while he stayed with Joanna, holding her hand through the pains. "I'm scared," she admitted between contractions. "You're the strongest person I know," he reminded her. You survived Charles Morrison and a Nebraska winter and traveling alone with 2 children. This is nothing compared to that. She laughed, then gasped as another pain took her. Don't make me laugh. The midwife arrived. Mrs. Kowalski, a sturdy Polish woman who delivered half the babies in the county. She took charge immediately, banishing Luke to the main room where he paced like a caged animal. Thomas and Sarah sat with Samuel, all 3 pretending to play cards but really listening to every sound from the bedroom. Bones whined anxiously, sensing the tension. Then, just as the sun reached its peak, a new cry split the air. Luke was moving before he realized it. But Mrs. Kowalski met him at the door. A son, she announced, beaming. Healthy and loud. The mother is fine, tired but fine. Luke pushed past her to find Joanna propped against pillows, hair damp with sweat but smiling radiantly. In her arms was a bundle of blankets from which emerged tiny fists and an indignant wail. Meet your son, she said softly. Luke approached like the baby might break if he breathed too hard. When Joanna placed the infant in his arms, he felt something crack open in his chest, a love so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. He's perfect, he whispered. What should we name him? Joanna asked. Luke thought of his father, whose dream this ranch had been, of Joanna's strength in surviving and finding her way home, of second chances and love redeemed. David, he said finally. David Joseph Barrett, after my father and yours. David, Joanna repeated, smiling. I like it. Thomas and Sarah were allowed in then, approaching their new brother with the wonder children reserved for miracles. Sarah wanted to know if they could keep him, while Thomas solemnly promised to teach him everything about ranching when he was bigger. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Luke sat on the bed beside his wife, their children arranged around them like points of a compass. David slept peacefully in Joanna's arms, unaware that he'd completed something that had been broken for so long. I love you, Joanna said, looking around at her family. All of you. My whole heart. Luke kissed her temple, gentle and reverent. And we love you. Always have. Always will. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, the Barrett family settled in for their first night as 5, the ranch house that had once echoed with loneliness now full to bursting with love. They'd traveled a hard road to get here, through abandonment and fear, through loneliness and loss. But every step had led them home, to each other, to this moment of perfect completion. In the years to come, there would be challenges, droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and failed crops. David would be followed by 2 sisters, filling the house with even more laughter and chaos. Thomas would grow into a fine rancher, eventually taking over the Barrett spread. Sarah would marry the minister's son and start her own family nearby. Samuel would live to see the new century, dying peacefully in the bed Luke built for him, surrounded by the family he'd helped create. But all of that was still to come. For now, there was just this, a man and woman who'd found their way back to each other, children safe and loved, a baby representing hope for the future, and a love story that would be told in the valley for generations. The Barrett Ranch stood solid against the Wyoming sky, no longer a monument to loneliness, but a testament to the power of love to heal all wounds, to bridge all distances, to turn even the harshest frontier into a home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. If you've enjoyed following Luke and Joanna's journey, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on their story. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of love, adventure, and redemption from America's frontier days. Share what touched your heart in this story. We read every comment and love connecting with our listeners from around the world.